Broadcasting from the heart of downtown Hollywood. This is SoFlowRadio.com.
Stuart Reed, attorney, mediator, and yoga instructor, here for the next hour to talk about law, mediation, and yoga. So let's drop into our breath and come to order. The show is now in session.
Okay, thank you, Steely Dan and Walter Becker. May he rest in peace for the beautiful music starting off our show today. Thank you, Kristen Rosen Gonzalez, for coming on the show. And thanks, George, for making this space available for us.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us. Happy Labor Day, everybody.
Happy Labor Day. Everybody enjoy yourselves.
Yeah, happy Labor Day.
So I'll give you a little bit of background to this show. Kristen here has been a friend of mine for many years, and when I first met her, I knew, and I thought, I remembered too, that she had done a yoga teacher training program. I know that we have many similar yoga teacher friends in common, and we lost touch, and I saw that she ran for Miami Beach City Commission, and now she's a Miami Beach City Commissioner, and now we have a lot of friends in common too in Miami Beach. So she's talented at making friends, she's talented at getting herself into office, and she has a yogi background. So I thought we could have her here to talk about how having a background in yoga might help somebody who's there in politics, which is known for people who are not very nice. They cut each other down. A lot of people have hidden interests, and if you don't agree with them, they can get personal about it. I understand you're also a professor, and you're a mom of 3 wonderful kids, raised them awesome. So how did yoga fit into all this? How did yoga fit into you deciding to run, maybe, or being a more effective mom? Or I'll step back because I talk too much sometimes, and it's all yours. The floor is yours, Kristen.
Well, this morning when I started to think about coming on this show and speaking about yoga, I had to reflect on my entire yoga experience, and I started practicing yoga in 2006. So I've now been practicing yoga almost 11 years, which is pretty amazing. And I owe my life to yoga because it was transformational. My first yoga class.
Well, how do you mean? Why did you first go to yoga? Were you going through something in your life? Was it you were doing it just as an exercise routine? What drew you to yoga in 2006?
I went to a yoga class because there was a small studio in Miami Shores, and one of the moms kept telling me that I have to try this yoga studio, and it was really for exercise. But at the end of the first class, when I realized the positions were painful, and I was sweating, and I was awkward, and then at the end of the class, we sat down, we laid down to do this shavasana, and I just started to cry. And I realized at that moment in time that I hadn't cried in maybe 20 years.
For people watching who don't know what shavasana means, it's the final pose in a yoga class where you're just lying on your back and you're supposed to let go of everything.
It's the only pose I do really well. I'm awesome at it.
Asana means pose, and shav, I guess, means corpse. So you're supposed to be there like a corpse.
It's like a final meditation. What you do in yoga is you agitate your nervous system, and then at the end you calm it down by spending 5 minutes just relaxed in a corpse pose, laying back. And I started to cry, and it was the most bizarre experience. I didn't understand why I was crying, but I knew that I'd opened something up in my body. And after that, I cried for about a year, but they weren't sad tears. I would just cry. I think I just became more emotional, and maybe there was a disconnect prior to starting yoga between my physical body and my mind and spirituality. And
so can I stop a second too, just because you're making me think of things while you're talking? Because I think one of the goals of yoga is to like open up and not really resist, just to let things flow, let the energy flow. And so maybe the crying was that you had been resisting things, and then finally you were opening up and letting it out.
Yeah, I would be watching a movie, like an animated Disney film with my kids, and something emotional would happen, and I would just start crying. So I definitely opened something up, maybe in my joints. They say you hold on to like stress and anger in your hips. And at the time, I was in a very unhappy marriage. I didn't realize it at the time, though. But once I started practicing yoga, I didn't stop. I went every single day, once or twice, for 2 years following. And as my body grew stronger, so did my mind, so did my conception of reality and who I was and my truth. And I remember about probably after taking 1,000 yoga classes, one day I opened my eyes and I said, I need to change my life. I need to get divorced. I need to reinvent myself. I need to figure out who I am apart from just a mom. And I was only able to take those steps after 1,000 hours of meditation and yoga and quieting my mind and finding a higher level of consciousness. So it was very powerful. It was an extremely powerful time. And it was funny because right when I decided to do that, I got an email that night that said, become a teacher. And I said, oh, I can do that. So I filed for divorce and I became a teacher. And I got hired so quickly after I took the exams. I got hired in the inner city. And I was teaching a class. I have every single...
What kind of class?
I was teaching English, which I'd never taught before. And I was teaching at an F school, Miami Central. It has the highest AIDS rate in the nation. And all the students who I got in my classes were the ones who'd failed the FCAT, which means that they could not read or they were reading at a 5th or 6th grade level. And the only way that they'd gotten to 11th or 12th grade was by being aggressive. Because if you can't read and a teacher calls on you, then your response is aggression, or, you're mean, you get thrown out of the class, but teachers tend to leave you alone if you're aggressive. So that's when I really started to draw on my strength from yoga. And I would find myself at that moment in time just starting to breathe. You know how like you're in a really hard posture?
Instead of just reacting.
I would just...
You center yourself.
I would just breathe, and I would use these techniques with my students, actually. And we would start some days with a meditation because I didn't know where they were coming from. They were probably coming from homes where they hadn't been fed dinner. There was no breakfast. A lot of them were coming to class with Cheetos and strawberry sodas, and they were agitated and they were angry. So we would start out the class with this meditation, and they thought I was nuts. But I would sit on the desk with my Dunkin' Donuts coffee at 7:30, which is when high school starts, and we would start to breathe. And it was a really transformative year, not just for me, but for the students.
Well, I hear often in yoga classes, teachers say at the end of the class, well, now's when the real yoga practice starts, when you get off the mat and you go out there into the world. What does that mean to you?
Off the mat and into the world. I think that...
Well, I made up that part, but I mean the real yoga starts when you're out there, because I hear you saying that you're teaching like the practice of yoga and breathing and all, but how about like in the way you talk to people, the way you listen to people? Yoga means unity. So I often think when I'm speaking with people, is there yoga in my conversation? Am I like, sometimes people try to show each other or put them in their place, or they're confrontational. But if you're going to have yoga in your communications, then you're trying to bring people together. It's about unifying.
I think yoga creates a sense of humility for people because there's so many poses that in my head I look one way and then I look in the mirror and I say, oh, that's not at all how I really look. And I think that humility creates a kind of compassion that other people might not have. And you also have a self-awareness of who you are. And I think it just all kind of flows together. These ideas of ahimsa, of not hurting anybody, and satya, telling the truth, and just cultivating this compassion for people is with me all the time, and it's created a self-awareness. And I also, at Miami-Dade College, I teach communications, and we talk all the time about empathy and compassion, which is what I really think we're lacking in society right now. It's so narcissistic. It's the opposite of yoga. Everyone has their cell phones focused on themselves instead of focused on the world.
And they look at others as either helpers or obstacles. Are you useful to me? Like people are tools instead of real other people.
Yeah, we just don't listen. We don't really empathetically listen to other people. And I think that yoga, there's something so simple about it that brings you down to earth, that allows you to go out and cultivate, empathy for others. So
you think yoga could make better elected public officials, public servants, because of that empathy and ahimsa, nonviolence?
I always do. Before a commission meeting, the night before, I always go to a yoga class. and I feel so great. And there's some mornings where I wake up and I go into the meeting and I feel so calm and centered, and I have so much compassion, and I feel like I'm going to do so much good for the community. And within the first 5 minutes of the meeting, all of that changes. I feel frustrated and aggravated. Somebody has already, said something offensive to me. I feel the injustice of not being heard at the meetings. And I wish that we practiced yoga together. And I wish that every politician would take the time for meditation and reflection and yoga. And I see the difference between the way that I look at issues and my fellow elected officials look at issues. And I really do think that, that idea of samadhi is embedded in self-actualization. And if you're happy with
what is samadhi?
Samadhi is the ecstasy that once you have a higher consciousness, we're all striving toward constantly. And I never think that it can be a constant. You have those moments during a yoga class or after a yoga class when your endorphins are surging and you feel so good. And those are the samadhic moments in life. They don't happen very often for me off the mat. Sometimes they do. The night I got elected, and it was such a people's victory because I was such an underdog and nobody believed in me. Nobody thought I was going to get elected. That was a type of samadhi because I was so happy to be a voice for those who don't have a voice in politics right now.
Well, samadhi, as I understand it, also everything in yoga, these are big concepts. There are books written about it, but samadhi is where you merge with the object of your meditation. And so here you felt, I guess, merged with your community, merged with your accomplishing your goals, like actualizing yourself.
I just felt so much love for everyone. And I realized it was the realization of so much hard work. And it was a moment that I'll never forget in life. It was larger than life. We don't have those moments very often. Maybe when you give birth, which, of course, you will never understand.
And is that what's driving you? I was there when my daughter was born. I was right there. I was the first one to in fact, here's the true story. When she came out, she was crying. They put her down on the table and measured her. She's crying. I walked over. I said, "That's okay. You don't have to cry. Daddy's here." She stopped crying. She recognized my voice, I think, because I was speaking to her when she was in this. So a familiar voice came by.
Your voice travels, so.
That's what we're really about. We're about human connection. And yoga creates a human connection.
Well, that's
because
what
you have
yoga's
this
all
idea of
about.
The group and the kula.
Yoga means unity.
I could very easily throw down a mat in my house every morning and, for 20 minutes do some poses and that would be somewhat effective. But there's something about going to the studio and feeling the energy of a yoga studio and seeing my fellow yogis that have also woken up at 7 a.m. to come to class. And there's something very special about that. And I appreciate that. So I always have a special affinity with my yoga studio. And right now I'm a member of Tropical Vinyasa, which is in Sunset Harbor in Miami Beach. And that studio is owned by Paul Delicious, who is one of my gurus.
He was one of my teachers at Synergy Yoga on Espanola Way years ago. Now they're on Alton Road.
I did my yoga teacher training with Paul.
You did?
And he has a
So
partner
did Moses, who
so did so many.
studio.
I think he's trained thousands and thousands of yoga teachers. Oh, I know Moses from I Love Yoga. Does he still sell the yoga clothing?
Yeah, I love yoga clothing.
Yeah, at one point in time, I was very into Kundalini yoga, and I had my head wrapped in white. Now when I look at the pictures now, it looks like I have toilet paper wrapped around my head. But that was a very special moment, traveling to Winter Park and doing these white tantric meditations where you sit in one spot and you stare into somebody's eyes for an hour, and it becomes physically uncomfortable, but also there's something bizarre about staring into somebody's eyes for 1 hour at a time.
It's not that it's bizarre. I mean, I've done it before too. It was emotional because while I was staring into somebody's eyes and somebody is guiding us through a meditation where we're supposed to recognize the greatness and humanity in the person we're looking at and to feel empathy for them, I started weeping. I think it's because I realized I never have anybody look at me in the eyes like that except for then my girlfriend or maybe my daughter. Nobody looks at me like that, and it made me very emotional.
No, they're very deep, intense moments, and they create spiritual growth. They do.
But how is this yoga? This is yoga because yoga means unity, unifying. Yoga is a practice of it was an 8-limb practice, the asanas, the physical postures, but also a system of ethics, things you're supposed to refrain from, like violence and lying and things you don't have to touch your notes. She knows I'm talking about the yamas and the yamas now. But also meditation and concentration and samadhi, like she mentioned, pranayama, breathing exercises. So these are all to bring you in touch with your inner self, your higher self. But then out there in society, there's yoga, there's bringing people together. And that's why we go to a studio, that we're unifying with other people as well. I heard something, I think yesterday, through scrolling through Facebook, where a guy was talking about the real reasons for drug addictions and drug abuse. And he was saying it's mostly loneliness, that people are disconnected, that in Portugal, where all drugs are legal, and they took all the money from drug enforcement to drug treatment, but they also try to socialize these people and give them a feeling of a sense of connectedness and a sense of purpose. I think a lot of people abuse drugs, at least on their own individually, because of loneliness, or when they're out with other people, they don't know how to connect. So people there, they don't know how to socialize if they don't have a beer in their hand or something like that. So yoga is sort of like the healthy drug, and it creates that connectedness.
You know, I will say that I've met thousands and thousands of people in politics, and Americans, gringo Americans, okay, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It's a very individualistic, lonely culture, whereas, the Hispanic culture is a collectivistic culture. They spend a lot of time with their family. They're so much happier than we are. And I figured this out the first time when I was trying to collect signatures for a petition at Publix. I would go to Publix in an English-speaking area, people would shy away from me when I would approach them just to say, hi, my name is Kristen Rosen Gonzalez. I'm running for the commission.
I think you want something from them.
But then I'd go to Navarro Pharmacy, and I would have to answer. First of all, people would avoid me. And if they did ask me questions, a lot of them were very abrasive and negative, and I would leave there feeling depleted. But I would go to a Navarro Pharmacy, and people would come up and give me a kiss on the cheek and say, of course I'll sign your petition. So I immediately stopped going to English-speaking areas, and I decided that I was going to run a very Hispanic campaign because the people were friendlier, and I had to reflect a lot upon that. Why was that? And I think it's because of the fact that their focus is not on themselves. Their focus is on the good of the group, and they spend so much time together. And there's no time for downtime or negative thinking when you're surrounded by people and abuelas and tias and tios, and it's just such a happy culture. And I think Judaism is very close, actually, to Hispanic cultures. So, and how does that relate to yoga? I'm not quite sure. Other than that,
that's okay. I could pull us back on track.
Union. No, but I wanted to talk to you about that because it really is it's a social phenomenon, the individualism versus collectivism. So that's why yoga is so important, because it gives Americans who are individualistic, it gives us the opportunity to learn a little bit of collectivism, which is what is the focus of the group. We're all moving together in sync, in rhythm. We're all breathing together. We're all singing together sometimes when you chant. And that's very powerful. The vibration of your voice. Sometimes when I used to be so afraid of my voice when I would om, afraid to hear myself, afraid of what it might sound like to other people. But
that was really the hardest thing in the teacher training program that I went to, was having people speak in front of groups of people and instruct. A lot of people just broke down in tears the first time they tried. I mean, I've had a lot of experience in public speaking, so for me, I just jumped right into it and I loved it. But for a lot of people, it was really terrifying.
Yeah, people are afraid.
So talking about afraid and talking about how hard you work to become a Miami Beach City Commissioner, and talking about the Hispanic community and how am I bringing this all together, you're wondering, is I've seen your post on Facebook lately where you're going knocking on doors in Little Havana. And I know you ran a big door knocking campaign in Miami Beach too. Right now, Kristen Rosen Gonzalez here is running for U.S. Congress. So it's a much bigger audience. And you're knocking on people's doors in Little Havana. That is hard work in the heat of the sun. And I'm concerned. Are you going by yourself, or you have people with you? How does it work now?
Yeah, I always knock by myself. I never feel afraid, and the reason I do that is because people invite me inside. If I was with a big group of people, I wouldn't have the same type of connection. And the way that I look at it is, I'm really knocking on doors of people who have always voted in elections, which means they don't commit crimes. I had one.
They don't commit felonies.
I had one scary incident when I was knocking in 2015. I knocked on the door. I was in a low-income housing building, and an older man let me into his apartment. I walked in. He was about 70, but then he shut and locked the door. He shut and locked the door behind himself, and he started to pull down his pants, and I said, oh my goodness, but he was only pulling down his pants to show me his bullet hole from when Castro had shot at him. So he was literally showing me all. Then I kind of calmed down, but that was a very frightening moment. And at that moment, I thought maybe I should rethink this door knocking alone. But most
a few years before you ran for city commission, I ran for city commission, and I kind of counted my blessings that I had lost afterwards because of the introduction or the close encounter I had was about how creepy it is in politics. There's so many creepy people involved in there that you don't know. Everybody wants something for you, and maybe they're being nice to you and talking behind your backs. But that's besides the point. I'm talking about the door knocking. Sure, you meet a lot of great people, and you get to network, and you get to develop a reputation in the community. But for me, sometimes some of these houses, like hoarders, you get to a hoarder's house and the odors that come out. I mean, I almost gagged.
You told me you wouldn't talk about my house on the air, Stuart.
Actually, George is a neat freak.
I love that, though, because that's anthropology. And for me, to when you've knocked on thousands and thousands of doors, you really start to understand who people are, what the community's like, what the different corners, like these, you walk a community and then you can understand it. And I'm fascinated by those homes. I've seen everything at this point. I've walked into homes where there's roach traps everywhere. I've walked into homes where there's stuffed animals. And sometimes you wonder, how can people live like this? But I've learned to respect other people's environments and smells. And that cultivates a huge sense of compassion, too, because I see how many people live in poverty.
And you're representing everyone. You're representing those people just as much as the person who's saying, hey, if you'll support me, I'll contribute to your campaign.
Yeah, I can't stand that transactional, part of politics.
But that's mostly what you're up against. The other commissioners or the other candidates, they're transactional politicians mostly, aren't they?
I hate to generalize, and I hate to speak poorly of any of my fellow colleagues. Although when I first got elected, I did all the time because I saw so many injustices, or I saw so many unethical actions on the part of other politicians that I called them out publicly. But I realized that that doesn't really achieve anything. I'm trying to build consensus. I'm trying to get great legislation passed, and I have to move beyond that and just focus on what my agenda is. And if that is, I was able to pass paid parental leave in the city of Miami Beach. That was a great feat. If I want to pass good legislation for the environment resolutions, I have to make friends with my colleagues and not judge them. Although, politics really is about judging, and, I see it in the press all the time.
Well, that's if you buy into the game and you play the rules of the game. But I'm thinking that maybe the takeaway point for you from this show when you're knocking on doors and your city commission meetings is to remember, I'm a Yogi politician. I'm bringing people together. I'm bringing the politicians together. I'm performing yoga in my service out there.
They have really made it difficult for me to do that. And I say to myself sometimes, I am so kind and I'm so loving and so compassionate. And then sometimes, though, I lose control in the meetings and I will bark back at somebody, especially when I feel passionate about something. And they will also take what I say out of context and then frame it and say, you're attacking us, when I'm not attacking anyone. I'm basically telling the truth. And I try to stay fact-based instead of attacking the person. You attack the issue. And I know that because I teach that in communications and, speech and debate. But some of the members of the commission are just not very nice to me sometimes. And people see it in the audience. They email me afterward. They call me. I know that they're out there, and I know that they support me and love me. And I know that a lot of times they feel very badly the way I get treated on the dais. So
how many times have you campaigned? The once and a second time too?
In 2013, I began a campaign, and then the group that initially kind of recruited me and supported me said, you're not going to run in this race. So I withdrew. I was never on the ballot. In 2015, I had no intention of running. I was focusing on my academic career. I'm finishing my dissertation, which I'm still doing because of politics, and working on real estate.
So you're in your first term?
So I'm in my first term.
Okay, that was my question, because I was wondering, because you're talking about how, unkind your colleagues can be, but still you're running for a much bigger office now, U.S. Congress. So what do you like about politics that you want to keep going further in it? Why do you feel personally that it...
The reason that I'm running for Congress is because people like me normally don't get elected. I'm not connected or married into some political family. I don't have millions of dollars. I represent so many people that need representation in Congress. I'm not a lawyer, for example. Congress has 200 lawyers, and I know that I'm on this path because of the universe and something greater than I am. And I know that if I frame it in terms of, I can speak for so many who can't. And that's what, keeps me moving. When I went to lecture this past week, the semester had just started at Miami-Dade, and one of the girls in the front row was just beaming. And I try not to tell my students that I'm running for office, because there's a fine line between me advocating for myself politically, but people kind of know who I am in the district now.
But you're a communications professor,
I'm a
right?
communications professor. And
So
one of
it's
my students
relevant,
said
your
to me,
experience.
You are so inspirational. We've read your story, and that I'm getting goosebumps right now. That just made it all worth it, because I can inspire my students to get involved. And
it's not by what you say, but by being yourself, by being an authentic person.
I try to do, I try to do the right thing all the time, and that is so, it's not difficult in politics, but the pressure involved, because I don't want to offend anybody either. And sometimes we have these votes that come before us, and both sides have merit, and you have to make a decision. You can't get out of a vote, I found very quickly. There are many times where I'd rather
you can't excuse yourself
myself.
and I got to go to the bathroom.
There is, a controversial vote right now that's coming up. For example, there's a lovely young lady. Her name is Sabrina Cohen, and we have a park and a beach named after her. She is in a wheelchair, and we have funded a park for people with disabilities, and she has these adaptive beach days. She would like to build a facility on 53rd Street in Collins in a parking lot. And there are a lot of residents who live in the surrounding areas who just they don't want that facility, because they don't think that public land should be turned over to a private entity. And I understand where they're coming from, because they've lived there. They need that parking lot. The details of the lease. If she doesn't raise this money, she could possibly lease this property out to someone else. And that's very difficult, because you don't want to vote against the disability, and you want to do what's right. So these are the types of votes, and I still don't know how I'm going to vote on this issue. But, I admire what she's doing. I just wish that she didn't want to build a facility on public beachfront land, because that land is so valuable, and I'd like it to all remain open space so that everybody can enjoy it and people can park and go to the beach. So we have these really difficult ethical issues that come in front of us, and there's a lot of pressure involved. And there's, excuse my language, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So you just try to do what your heart tells you to do.
So land use is a big topic in Miami Beach City Commission meetings, correct?
It is. There are developers.
Sorry how I framed the question. It sounded like I'm in a deposition.
You might be a lawyer.
It's very interesting. We have a culture in Miami Beach of no upzoning. All right. No height increases, no density increases. But I will say that if you want to be realistic about where we're moving and sea level rise, there's no way that you can avoid height increases anymore in new properties, in new homes. It would almost be morally wrong to not allow people to build higher. But the question is, if somebody builds higher, is it becoming intrusive on your neighbor's property? Is it going to drain into your neighbor's property? Are you is the neighbor losing their privacy? So we have these issues coming before us all the time, and the preservationists supported me, and I believe strongly in preservation. And I think because of preservation,
You know, I'm on the Design Preservation League
Yes.
board of directors.
so these are very difficult decisions, though, because we're going to have to somehow increase our tax basis because we need money to mitigate for sea level rise. We can't keep factoring it into people's water bills. Right now in the city of Miami Beach, in a single family home, your water bill is about $350 per month. If we keep taxing the residents and they're paying these premiums, I mean, it's going to become unaffordable, and only the rich.
Why
are gonna
is
be
it
able
so
to live on
high? Is
Miami
it for
Beach.
stormwater?
It's all stormwater.
It's all stormwater, because here in Hollywood,
Yeah.
it's all sewage, and it's really cheap.
Is it?
But,
I own some properties, in city of Miami, and I would get my water bill, water and sewer would be like $60 for 3 months. And I was shocked when I would get those bills. And then I realized that Miami Beach is really being treated unfairly in terms of the price of water and stormwater and sewer. So we're going to have to do something to keep prices down, because we have to have diversity. We have to have middle-class families, but there is a gentrification happening because people who live in subsidized housing or Section 8 or even middle-class people, they can't afford those water bills, and they can't afford to rent. Rental prices go up because of it. So we have some serious issues, economic issues in Miami Beach.
well, when you're looking at the long term and
The
short
long
term, too.
It's
Yeah,
coming sooner than we think. There's sea level rise. There's a phenomenon happening with the currents in south of Cape Hatteras on the eastern seaboard. We're going to get 6 times as much sea level rise as other places in the world, because the ocean undulates. It's not just flat.
Right.
And we're seeing that right now. And, I was talking to the mayor of Pinecrest a month ago, and they're all on well water. And they all have saltwater intrusion. It's ruining their appliances. So the question is, what are we going to do moving forward? We're going to have to begin to desalinate water. And then we have these, rain events and storms like Hurricane Irma, which is about to, which could potentially hit us this week. And, after seeing the senior citizens submerged in Houston during Hurricane Harvey, I haven't stopped thinking about how we're going to evacuate all of our seniors. And make sure that they leave. This is going to be a massive evacuation. We're going to have to insist that people leave the city.
This may be an extensive evacuation. It might be.
Maybe
Yeah.
if we get this
We'll
storm.
know in a few
but,
days, yeah.
But I've started thinking about it now because we have to.
No, I've thought about what the future of Miami Beach is. People say, oh, we're all going to be underwater from sea level rise. And yes and no. I think the no part is Miami Beach was underwater before it was developed. And so there was dredge and fill. And I think there's just going to be a lot of fill. It's going to be the age of fill, raising the streets, and then the buildings are going to have to, I guess, be condemned on the bottom level and retrofitted up, or they're going to have to be demolished and build
Or we'll have to
higher up
raise
and more.
them.
Yeah.
And what-
Stiltsville, Dad. Let's turn the whole thing into
Or
Stiltsville.
stilts, yeah.
Venice of
Adaptive.
the East.
But all of that is very expensive,
Yeah.
and that brings into question our historic districts preservation. How do we preserve that? Are we going to? We're going to have to change the building code, and people might be able to demolish those buildings and rebuild them exactly as they are, but just higher. No.
Preserve the facades, so it's sort of like, going to Disney World and it's
Right.
recreation.
You take a
of
picture like the
historic
taxidermist. You take a
It's-
picture and then yeah.
But it's really sad to think that my children might not be able to live in Miami Beach. And this existential question is something that is so difficult for all of us to face, but we're facing it now. I see neighbors at homeowners associations getting ready to punch each other, and people when we have these meetings about raising the streets or declaring certain neighborhoods historic, people have to be removed from the meetings because everybody feels very emotional and they get violent over it. So our community is facing a serious existential crisis.
So let's see how yoga could improve the situation. So there's an ethical foundation of yoga. The very first is ahimsa, non-violence. So certainly in the meeting, people ought to be able to communicate with each other without want to punch each other or defame somebody else. But also in yoga is the concept of ahimsa, non-attachment, that you have to be able to be in the present and not in the past, and not worried about the future, to live fully in the here and now and trust your abilities. And I guess if we can't keep the sea from rising, we're going to have to look ahead and not try to hold on and maintain. I mean, it's going to be impossible to hold on, really. I mean, if the sea level rises, at least in South Florida, first of all the Everglades is going to be saltwater too. And so we lose our fresh water, drinking water supply. Everything has to be desalination. But
that's shocking. We have no plans for desalination, and I don't even know where we're going to get the funding from. So this is very scary. But the Rockefeller Foundation has invested a lot of money in this initiative called 100 Resilient Cities, and they are coming to our communities and making sure that the mayors are educated and that the elected officials are educated and all the stakeholders understand what's happening. So we're finally starting to have these conversations. Miami Beach was first because we knew that we were on the front lines. But right now, the city of Miami, for example, is floating a $400 million bond to fund a sea level rise. But yeah, listen, I think that coming together in collectives and, even in religious organizations is not so far from yoga. I mean, people come together and they meditate through prayer and they sing together, and which you do in yoga too. And you practice. What that's missing really is
being
the
grateful.
physical component. And it's that physical component of being in touch with your physical body that I think is transformative about yoga that religion doesn't really have. Although you can go to a lot of churches and temples and they have yoga. And I've been in yoga classes where, they say, breathe in for Jesus, breathe out Jesus. I went along and breathed.
They had a workshop at the I Love Yoga Center where it was Kabbalah yoga. The guy has DVDs. He's awesome. He's a lawyer in Canada, Orthodox Jew, who also has developed a Kabbalah yoga class. Very inspirational.
There's just something about the release of yoga and breathing in and stopping this constant vibration. With our cell phones, we're vibrating up here and we're getting notifications all day and it's so fast and we're switching. And then you have to go to yoga and you have to calm down and you have to breathe and you have to focus. And I found that yoga has become so much more difficult as I'm tied to my cell phone. I have 6 email addresses and people are tweeting me and Facebooking me and now Instagramming me. I mean, there's so much of that. And that is really unhealthy. I do not think that
you need an
evolved.
Assistant to handle your social media,
do.
so you could go on the mat and relax and take care of yourself.
I do need to learn how to delegate more, but so many.
If you
people
want, I'll be your assistant.
That I would love for you to answer my emails. You'd answer them the right way. I'm so afraid that somebody might offend one of my constituents or not give them the attention that they deserve. But at some point, I'm going to have to accept help from people and not try to field all the messages myself, because I can wake up in the morning and spend the first 2 hours of the day where I should be, reflecting and reading the newspaper and really, just calming myself and preparing for the day. I'll spend answering people's messages and that's fine. I love to do that, but it's a very surface level communication, and I'm kind of a deep person and I don't have a lot of time for deep reflection these days. And that's very disturbing. And that's what happens in politics a lot of time. If you think about it, if you spend all day going from one event to the next and you're cutting ribbons and you're shaking hands, that's why sometimes when you see a politician who's been around forever, they look almost robotic.
But that looks like the fun part of politics, isn't it?
Anything that you have to do all the time is no longer, fun. It's work. But
because you've made a lot of friends in politics, aren't you? We saw each other recently, and I saw that you had a lot of politician friends, and it seemed like nice people, and it seemed like you were having a great time.
I love my constituents. I love the community. I love the different special interests, whether they be environmentalists,
like-minded colleagues,
preservationists. I love helping them. Labor, especially I'm a union member, so I get to help out labor. So it's helping.
Which union are you a member of?
The United Faculty of Miami-Dade College, and we are a very strong union and powerful too. I mean, we have significant financial reserves, and we get to go to Tallahassee and contribute to campaigns. Unfortunately, if you want to have a voice, you have to have money behind that. So we've been able to take our union dollars and become very powerful politically under the leadership of Mark Richard, who is, I think he's like the chair of our union now. He's stepped down, and Elizabeth Ramsey, who's our president. But we have a very strong union culture with like 85% membership. So that's been a great experience too. It's why I got involved in politics in the first place, because the administration actually asked me to travel to Tallahassee, and when I saw how Democrats were being treated, they were literally sitting in the back of the bus, in the back of the legislature, and the Republicans were in the front. And when a Democrat would get up to speak, the Republicans would just start talking, tune them out. Nobody was listening. It was very disrespectful. And I couldn't believe that the politicians, legislators in Tallahassee, were not listening to logic. They were just voting in these bizarre ways that were not in the best interest of the majority of the residents of the state of Florida. And that was really shocking for me. And I realized that there's so many injustices, and it's so hard to get elected. If you don't have connections and you don't have money, you just have to rely on human resources. And I was able to actually, pull on the fact that I'm fluent in Spanish, and that I teach public speaking, and I understand communications and how people thought. And I was able to use these resources, which were much more powerful than money. So I'm trying to do that again in this congressional race, and I hope I'll be successful. But I have a tremendous amount of work. When I think about it, it's dizzying. So I have to make time for yoga, though, because sometimes I don't. In my last campaign, I didn't, I had barely had enough energy to walk the streets in the heat all day. But, this morning and before I came here, I said, I'm going to go to a yoga class. And I did. And I feel so calm and good right now. So I always have to come back to my roots, come back to the mat. And one thing I love about yoga is that it's always there for me. It's the best tool in my toolbox because, people come and go, and finances change all the time, but yoga can really be a constant in life, and it's something I truly rely on to keep me stable and balanced. And I'm a very I'm not nervous, but my mind is constantly moving. And when I was younger, I suffered from insomnia, but since I've been practicing yoga the past 12 years, I sleep like a log. There's something that it does for my nervous system, my levels of serotonin, that just keep me happy and keep me even keeled. And that's so much better than most of the nation who's relying on opioids and are overdosing from opioids and are on Xanax and antidepressants. And we really have become a pharmaceutical culture where you just pop a pill and you don't feel anything. And that's really not the solution. And I think that's also why you see the explosion in yoga. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's grown.
Well, it's so good for you. It makes you feel so good. And when you were talking about how it's such a blessing in your life and it's always there, it's a constant, the way that I often describe meditation to people, it's a refuge that you carry around inside yourself. If you just focus on your breath and you quiet your thoughts and you don't attach to the thoughts that come try to distract you and call off your attention, it's like a mini vacation that you can have anytime, anywhere by just focusing on your breath.
Yeah, I teach that to all of my students in communication too, because, if you're not okay psychologically, then what you do in terms of your communication is probably not that healthy. So I try to teach that for them. And sometimes they'll get to class and everybody's sweaty and hot and agitated. And I'll teach them that they can go to YouTube and just Google 5-minute meditation. And they can put that on their phone and they can follow that guided meditation. And even I see in myself that I become much calmer, much more focused, much more centered. And then when we start the class, it's so much better for all of us. But for young kids, 20-year-old college students, they have to kind of go beyond that awkwardness of me lowering the lights in class and making everybody breathe. But some of them really embrace it. And toward the end, if they see that I'm embracing it, then they say, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I can see them all breathing. Even now, when you just take a deep breath, everything changes.
Yeah, you make me breathe.
Because we tend to cut our breath short.
We do.
Yeah, most people.
I tend to hold mine when I'm doing something that I think is high stress or concentration. I'm going to concentrate on this, which is the opposite of what you ought to be doing.
Yeah. When I was practicing Ashtanga yoga every day, I would find myself switching into that deep ujjayi breath. When something would go hard, I would start breathing. And I said, oh, that's so bizarre. I've trained my brain to breathe in stressful situations. And I wish I could go back to that place. But unfortunately, I don't have 90 minutes. It takes a couple hours. If you wanted to practice Ashtanga, you need to dedicate about
to do the series
2 hours a day. And that's very difficult.
Well, at the I Love Yoga studio where I teach, we have Ashtanga, modified Ashtanga classes that Zaina Dagaya teaches. It's an hour and 15 minutes, and I love it.
I practice Ashtanga twice a week, but I don't stay for the whole class. Most times I come in, I'll do the opening asanas, And 30 minutes of yoga is better than no yoga. And I feel terrible because I walk into the class and I tell the instructor I'm going to be leaving early. And I feel like that's so disrespectful. But, they know already that I'm just going to put my mat by the door and do as much as I can before I have to leave and do an interview or go to work or go to something, because I'm very busy these days. But I have to always remember that yoga is my rock and base and where I should operate from. And I think that the more I practice, the better I will be in communicating with other people. And you give off a certain energy. You just do. People tell me that all the time. They say, you have such a kind energy. And that's the best compliment I could ever get.
Well, they say you want to change the world, you start with yourself.
Yeah. And
Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. And I was thinking in terms of politics, too, as I was driving here today, that is there room for maybe a yoga-based political movement? But I think that Gandhi was that. There's ahimsa, the idea of nonviolence. And I think that I personally think there would maybe be a good place for a party in the U.S. Maybe we don't call it the yoga party, but the English word for the unity, national unity, where you're not. Because, listen, I agree with the progressive ideas, but I don't want to be always fighting one side or the other. I'd like to be, I'm the one in the middle. I'll listen to all of the facts and make my best decisions. And certainly as a yogi who wants to be nonviolent, we're environmentalists. We want to be kind to the world around us. We want to be kind to other people. But not to take the bait. And when you're in political discussions and be raising your voice when somebody raises their voice at you, or to try to cut somebody down and show all the weaknesses, to be the adult in the room. I think that there should be a political party that's the adult in between the Democrats and the Republicans.
I like your the name, your Unity Party. Is that taken?
No, probably. But
No, but I definitely think we're primed for a third party, because more and more people, I believe 33% in the state of Florida are now NPAs or independents. And that's really defining. It means that, people are leaving the parties. What happens when, people leave the party and become independent is that there are more extremists on both sides. And, and for some reason, like that anger and that hate toward the other side really resonates with so many people. And sometimes I can feel their hatred, the emails I get sometimes, because I have all these Republicans on my list, and I think, why would you send me this? I sent out a picture of a mango tree one time in my backyard, and it was talking about sea level rise in my mango tree and how saltwater intrusion, could affect it in the future. I got so many nasty emails, and I thought, here I am sending out a mango tree, and you're really sending me
why do you hate
mail.
America?
You and your stupid mango tree, you're a liar, you're despicable, disgusting. And I don't hate anybody. I don't hate Republicans. Sometimes I have a hard time understanding, their actions. Like when I think of Donald Trump and DACA right now, and not allowing those students who are so hardworking to stay here in the United States, that I just find confusing.
Yeah, the reason why they have the work permits is because they all have clean backgrounds. They wouldn't have had it, and there they are working. They're part of society. They've always been part of the U.S., so it's very un-yoga of Donald Trump to try to separate people and divide people and cast people away. We're all people. We all come from the same source. We all share the same material. We all come from the same spirit.
Well, the good news is that I know that at least one other member of my commission, who I don't always get along with, but I know he does practice yoga. So I think that we are beginning to elect people that think differently, that are more open to new ideas, that are practicing yoga. And I think you're going to see a change over the next decade in who we elect. And it's not going to be politics as usual, because social media has changed all of that, and people cannot get away with bad votes anymore.
Oh, you don't think it's polarizing people? Because I think some people have their feeds and we have our feeds, and they sort of try to keep us apart. But you're saying that it makes people more savvy.
Well, I think we should see in 2018 what happens. I feel very sad for the Democratic Party. We've run a lot of really horrible races and squandered a lot of money and lost a lot of elections. We're in a very weakened position right now, and I'm hoping that we can change that by starting to be smarter. And I think most importantly, realize that there's a huge political industrial complex, and there's an insistence that you're only judged on the amount that you have in your campaign. And I think that is so wrong. It's the worst. I think that you can run very respectable campaigns with 10% of what people raise, because at the end of the day, politics is about people. It is not just about money. And when you touch people and you're authentic and you're compassionate and you're truthful, that's what people, that's what resonates with people. We're not seeing that so much in a lot of our politicians. Some of them, they look so fake and it's so contrived. And even the emails that you get, on the Democratic side, sometimes I'm so sick of getting the same packaged emails. It's like the industrialization of ideas, the democratic industrialization of how we feel and how we should legislate.
Well, you're talking about being authentic and touching people, which I'm sure a lot of people appreciate, but I also think that a lot of politicians are just sort of like, they're the face of their constituents, and they're there bringing forward their agendas and values.
But that's wrong. They're absolutely not the face of their constituents. They are the face of the people that contribute to their campaign. Okay? Because, you are who contributes to your campaign these days, and that's very sad. Marco Rubio is a perfect example of that. He's posting, and I have nothing against, the Bible and Bible verses, but I look at his Twitter feed and he's posting these Bible verses all day long. And when he opens his mouth, he is Norman Brayman, who funds his campaign. So he's really spouting the ideas of, an 80-something-year-old person, and those are not the ideas of the 21st century.
Why do
it's
people?
Very disturbing.
Do you
that
think
he wins? He wins though because
he's got money behind him.
But so he's not representing his constituents.
Right.
He's representing a very small group of people with a lot of money.
But why is faith-based politics such a big part of American politics? Why is your spiritual values so important to and how could yoga fit into that puzzle too?
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, because I'm spiritual, but not religious. And I believe in that everybody is good on some level. And I try not to judge anybody. But I think that people are reaching for religion because they are unhappy. And religion is a drug, just like any other, just like yoga. And I understand that people need that to make sense out of their lives. And there's a beautiful cultural component about it too. And one of my professors in my PhD program is a staunch Catholic. And I remember we were studying the philosophy of science. And I said to her, afterward, how can you be such a staunch Catholic, having read everything that we've read and knowing everything that we know? And, do you believe in, the burning bush? Did that really happen? Or do you think that was written by somebody and it's a type of mythology to explain, to explain ethics or, control people? And she said, I am very educated, but I like going to church and I like to pray, which is a type of meditation, and I like to sing and I like to come together in the same kind of collective group. So I think society needs religion just like they need yoga. Mm-hmm. They're very parallel.
But that's very, like at our yoga studio, they have events where people just come to sing and to sing mantras. And
kirtan.
So it's kirtan. In fact, Sunday mornings, Moses's class is called Yoga Church.
Oh, is it?
And to give people and what do you people do in church? Well, they give thanks. Mm-hmm. That's one of the values of yoga, is to try to be content with what you have, to count your blessings. And yoga does come from the Hindu tradition, but you don't see Hindus out there trying to convert people. It's not like a religion trying to change people. And I think that a yoga studio, you can come into it and be a Christian, as you pointed out, or be a Jew. You don't have to be a Hindu, and it welcomes everybody, but it still gives you a sense of find yourself, find your higher power in yourself, find the guru within yourself.
Well, it's a focus on the metaphysical, and you see that in the Unity Church too, which is a beautiful practice. And you see all religions coming together at the Unity Church to sing and talk about the fact that God is inside of us, just like, namaste, the light within me honors the light within you. So we all have this light inside of us, and we have to cultivate it. We have to remind ourselves that it's inside of us, because society is so stressful, and we can really easily ignore that little voice inside of us, which needs to be nurtured, which is why yoga is so important. You go and you feel that.
From the, Jewish tradition, that still small voice is the voice of God, not the sound of thunder, not the sound of chariots thundering. So you quiet your voice, you hear the authentic voice come in, and also the idea that God is one. So that means that you're part of it all too.
Yeah, I know. Yoga is very spiritual. And even if you don't practice the spirituality of it, if you just do the asana, you still have that spiritual transformation, because there's something about coordinating your breath with your movements and being in the moment that changes the way your psychology operates, and it's transformative. Just like that feeling that you get when you're at church and everybody holds hands at the end and sing "Give Peace a Chance." You're oming and you just feel.
That's at the Unity Church?
Yeah.
Do you go there, Unity on the Bay?
I used to attend Unity on the Bay more often than I do now.
I have a number of friends who go there, and I see their postings on Facebook that they have popular yoga classes there, right?
They do. That's where I did I Love Jesus yoga class, breathe in God, breathe out God, and, and it's just that I am love. I used to teach meditation at the Miami-Dade campus years ago, and my classes were so simple. To be honest, I had no formal training in meditation whatsoever when somebody approached me and said, would you teach it? So I taught it, and the first day I had like 100 students, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? So I just had us sit there, and we just breathed in like, I am love. Exhale, I am love. And we did that for 15 minutes, and people came up to me and emailed me all week long saying, you know what, you've changed my life. I couldn't believe how many unhappy people there were that don't sleep. People do not sleep.
Because people don't realize that voice in their head that's going on and on all the time, what they call the monkey chatter.
Yeah, the monkey brain.
The monkey brain we were talking about with Jamie in the last show. It's a Buddhist terminology, but people think they're always following that chatter. They think that's how they're going to survive, and they think that's who they are. And from the time they wake up until the time they go to sleep, they're just chattering away. And when a bad thought comes, they feel bad. And then I think in meditation, you realize that chatter is your mind, and your mind isn't necessarily who you are. You are your awareness. So you're aware of the chatter in your mind. You're aware of the temperature in the room. You're aware of, is my mouth dry or...
Right. Oh, you get aware of like, oh, there's a pain I didn't know I had.
It's a constant process, though, of reminding yourself and reframing reality, because there are some mornings where I'll wake up and I'll feel really miserable, and I'll say, oh no, I got to get in my car and drive, 40 minutes to Kendall, and I'll start going down this rabbit hole. And what yoga's taught me is that I can stop that thought, be aware of it, and reframe myself and say, how lucky am I right now at this very moment? Or I'll feel angst about something else or anxiety, and I'll say, well, that's not really what's happening right now. What's happening in this very moment? I'm sitting here. Why does my mind take me to these odd places where there's fear and anxiety and negativity, and that's what the higher consciousness is. It's being able to separate that, and yoga really does create a higher consciousness that has a whole new meaning for me now. And I think it helps me so much in politics, because I can remove myself from the situation and really look at it. And that's the right side of our brain, which a lot of people aren't using right now. They're only using their left brain, which is like the cutting and the pasting and the Googling and the Facebooking and the likes. And it's all very, concrete. Where, the harassment part of the brain is holistic, and it looks at the entire system. And that's something special that human beings and some animals have, where we can remove ourselves from the situation and look at ourselves. And we have to really cultivate that part of, I think it's the corpus callosum in the brain.
Harassment, corpus callosum. what do we...
Well...
Is this what you teach to your
students? It is.
Yes,
I do. I talk a lot about the different sides of our brain, because I feel like we really are living in our left brains, especially my students. I figured it out for my son a few years ago. He was running for student class president, and he said, I need a funny opening for my speech. And he was Googling again and again, funny openings for speech. And I said, well, why don't you just put that away and start to think of something funny? And then we did. We figured out some joke that he was going to say about the principal when he started out. And I think that this new generation does not know how to think creatively and remove themselves from their phones long enough to understand what they're thinking and using certain parts of their brain. And we're not reading like we used to.
But when we say that the generation is a certain way, who's to blame? It's the teachers, it's the parents, it's and I think that's why we have so many problems in our country, is because of poor parenting and a history of violence and oppression, and that's sort of ingrained. That we're always like out for ourselves, survival of the fittest. Everything is a competition, and I think that it's time for a new way of looking at how to succeed, and it's who's going to be the most cooperative, that we can flourish together rather than compete and defeat.
I think it's a question.
Oh, the music is on?
Yeah, but you don't have to say that.
Oh,
I know it's
I don't
amazing.
hear it.
I
I
know.
like
You know.
Turn it up. Turn it up.
I thought you heard it. I'm wearing headphones.
Because
though.
The music.
So we did it? It's
is,
been an
is
hour?
the cue that we're almost going to end. And I started the show. I gave a nod to Walter Becker, who's enhanced our lives through Steely Dan. Here's Blackjack. Or do it again.
Right. A classic.
Thank
Kristen,
you.
I've learned a lot about you today. I've learned that you are courageous and also you're shy. I didn't know that. And
That's right.
How authentic you are and how broad-minded you are. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And how can people find out about your campaign?
I want your campaign, and I want to email you about your mango tree. So how do we do that?
You can email me at Kristen@rosengonzalez.com, and you can go to my website, which is voterosengonzalez.com. So
Rosen Gonzalez have a hyphen or not?
no, it's just vote ROSENGONZALEZ, voterosengonzalez.com to find out more about me and my campaign and what we plan to do to make your lives better.
And if you're looking for a yoga instructor or a lawyer or a mediator, you can contact me, Stuart Reed. You can find me on that Google technology. And if you're looking for this radio show for Hereafter an Eternity and other good shows, it's on SoFloRadio.com.
Right. Did you already give your website out?
Law Mediation LLC. Thank you, George.
Right, Law Mediation LLC.
And you can call me at my office,
where you can find all your shows.
954-2935. That's because George posts all my shows on there.
That's right, because you pay me.
Good to have him in my corner.
Great show.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
It was a lot of fun.
You want to do the out cue?
And, well, what's an out cue?
Over and out?
No, it's so
From high atop 1926 Hollywood Boulevard, you're listening to SoFloRadio.com.